So my name is Andrew Klein, and I have a handful of personal connections that sort of bring me up here tonight to introduce Walter Green, who happens to be a dear friend of mine of more than 30 years. And I was talking with Brett Keith about a year ago, and he was chatting about his mentor and this idea to bring Walter to our kickoff event. And I said, wow, Walter Green, I know Walter Green. And it turns out that my first college friend at Dartmouth happens to be Walter and Lola's, one of Walter and Lola's twins. And we were freshman year roommates. And I spent many a weekend in the Greens' home when we came back from college. And, it made me think how after college ended and Jason, their son, how his career took a path that took him to many places that I didn't go, specifically out to the West Coast, and how that is a relationship that is so important to me. And my God, how could I not reach out to Jason over, the years, the 20 years or the 30 years since college, and the distance? How could I let that possibly just not happen? I read the book. I love the book. And I found out in the book that I know quite a few people who are in the book. Actually, 5 or so of Walter Green's forum mates. Walter has been in YPO and WPO for, I think now 40-ish years. And he's been in one forum, maybe 2 forums, but certainly one forum more than 30 plus years. And those other forum mates that are in that forum, actually, many of whom spoke to me in the late 1990s and convinced me to join YPO because their forum stuck by each other, and through thick and thin, their forum experienced death. Walter, in fact, experienced a very untimely and very young death of his father at the age of 17. And I think that that very close experience with death, both as a teenager and as an adult, influenced Walter to come write this book and to present what he's about to present to us. I want to add one more really personal note. My mother-in-law passed away earlier this year, and I had the very good fortune of spending maybe 30 minutes with her the day that she died. And I was able to tell her how much she meant to me and how much her daughter, my wife, Alyssa, means to me, and her 4 grandchildren mean to me, and how I would forever take care of all of them and that she had nothing to worry about. We don't all get that chance. Walter is here to tell us about it. Thank you.
That's the best presentation of the subject I've heard in a long time. So it's very touching when 30 years ago you meet a freshman roommate of your son, and here we are. I was in YPO at that time. Now he's in YPO, and he gets to introduce me. That's as good as it gets. There were several reasons. Have to be a number of reasons for a Californian to fly cross country in this weather at this time in this week in New York. First, let me say that Brett is one of the most persuasive guys. He does not know the word no. He just knows the word win. So it was clear that he was convincing that I needed to give serious thought to this. And he mentioned Ed Hagem. Ed is a remarkable guy. Actually, he's been a singular force with the book. He's been probably the biggest spokesman at board meetings and everything, passing out the book, communicating the message. And so the fact that he also nudged Brett for this evening was very special. The third reason that I had to be here tonight really is I owe a lot to this chapter. I think you will find in your years, as you look back on it, you will realize the value of this experience. For me, as Andrew said, I was, to this day, still 31 years in a forum group that I started when I was in my 40s. Get that math out of the way so you know about how old I am. Don't have to deal with that in the future. Actually, a few of the forum members who had seen me for 31 years knew that I was speaking, and they just graciously are here to support me. So let them just wave their hand, turn around so they could see my forum guys who have been, come on, there they are. So, but speaking of blessings, the person who, I knew when I came to this moment, this is the moment, but the person who influenced me more than anybody else in my whole life, by a long shot, is here this evening. My wife, you stand, Lola Green. And last but really not least, the reason I came here is that I'm really excited about the prospects that in the next few minutes together, I might be able to enrich your life. I might be able to do that. I am going to give it my very best. You know, when I think about my YPO experiences, oh, we love to travel. Incidentally, I'd love an invite for one of those retreats. You all have really stepped it up since I was in this organization. Had I only known, I would have really negotiated very differently. In any case, we always used to enjoy the travel experiences, meeting new people. That was always special. But the one thing that has always stayed with me is if I ever got into a session where I actually could relate to a life lesson in that moment. And not only did it sound interesting, but I actually was able to make it operational, as they say. I was able to actually make it part of my life. And so tonight, my goal is you're going to forget who Walter Green was, but I hope you never forget the message I'm trying to convey. So let's be specific. I am hoping, and incidentally, this is the only group, it's typical YPO, I should have known. Every other group I speak, and then they buy my book at the end of the meeting. This group is very different. Half of you guys have already read the book. Some of them have watched my videos. So I do want to make really clear about what I'm here for tonight. It's pretty straightforward. One, I want to create an awareness in your mind of the power of expressing extraordinary gratitude. I want to elevate that awareness. Whatever level you came into this room, I want you to leave with an even stronger feeling of it. Secondly, I want to inspire you to take action. It's fine that you went and you said, you know, that was a nice speech. That's not going to do it for me. I didn't fly cross country to give a nice speech. What I flew cross country is that I'm going to be able to inspire you to take an action. And that action will enhance your life. It'll make differences in your relationship, and it will give you peace of mind. I'm going to talk more about that later. Lastly, this issue of peace of mind. The ability to communicate gratitude gives you that peace of mind that you can't get any other way. I promise you, I've experienced it. I'll talk more about it. Time permitting, and I really thought about this afterwards, if we have a few moments, I asked myself, when I was sitting out there in my 40s, listening to the various speakers, what have I learned in the last 30 years that I wish I knew when I was your age? And so if we have a few minutes at the end, I've given a little thought to that, and I want to throw that in a bonus. It's not in the book, so those of you who read the book, you wouldn't have heard this before. So let me give you a little bit of the roadmap for tonight. First, I want to give you a little bit more about my childhood, a little bit about my early life. Secondly, I want to tell you how this idea came to pass. How did the idea of taking a year-long journey ruminate with me? Third thing is I want to tell you, how did I get started? How did I do it? What did I learn about it? But the fourth part of it is where the payoff is. After telling you that, I want to inspire you to take your own journey. I'm going to leave time at the end for Q&A. I know you can't have a YPO meeting without Q&A, so I'm going to do that. And so, first of all, I thought that introduction was terrific, Andrew. Thank you. It was both emotional and very informative. I want to just give you a couple sentences of my first 30 years. It was characterized by constant change. I lived in 16 different cities and 18 homes by the time I was 29. I had 14 jobs by the time I was 29. So change was just part of my life. Spent the first time after I graduated from college, I was selling industrial textiles. A very fancy word. Those are shop towels. Those are kind of like rags, but we put a very fancy name on it. I then went into public accounting for 3 years, then joined three different companies in financial positions in the hotel field and in the food service industries. And then I joined a startup company that I'll mention in a minute. But the only stabilizing really activity of my life was at 24, we got married. And at 27, we are to set our twins, one of whom Andrew was relating to. In any case, I then spent 29 years of my life building Harrison Conference Centers, which is a very unique idea. It was a startup company, a niche company in the hospitality field that catered to executive meetings. Well, I sold that company in 1997, and at the age of 58, and for the last 20 years, I've been trying to level the playing field with underserved kids out in the South and the West. So that's a thumbnail sketch of my life, just to give you a little sense of the person who's up here at the podium. Now I want to give you a little bit about how did this idea come to pass. So the first thing was that you actually alluded to it, losing a father when you're 17. To add to that, my mother had cancer when I was 9. She survived. My father didn't. He lived just a few years later. You don't need many of those experiences to know that life is short, it's precious, and you can't count on it. You mentioned forum mate. Now, we think forum mates are going to be here for a long time. I didn't lose one. I lost 2 forum mates, actually in the Long Island Forum, before I joined the New York Forum. Another contributing factor, I don't know, I know you know Meet the Press, but I don't know how many remember Tim Russert. Yeah, how can we forget Tim? He was the longest running, most impactful moderator of Meet the Press. At age 58, he died from a heart attack. I don't know who have actually seen it, but I saw the funeral, and there were former presidents, rock stars, leaders of business, government, everyone was there. And they delivered the most beautiful eulogies. It was extraordinary. And while I was watching it, I said, it's a little bittersweet. I don't think Tim Russert heard any of that from these people when he was alive. And then I read 3 books. I'm assuming many of you have read them. Mitch Albom's book called Tuesdays with Morrie. It's kind of a classic. Another book called The Last Lecture by Randy Pausch. It's another wonderful book. And the one that maybe you could relate to because he was a New Yorker, he was the chairman of KPMG, international, one of the largest international accounting firms. At the age of 53, he was sitting at dinner. His face changed colors. He was rushed to the hospital, determined he had brain cancer, and they told him he had 4 months to live. What did he do in his last 4 months? He wrote a book. It was called Chasing Daylight. So what do all these 3 books have in common? They were written by people who wanted to leave a message to people who had been important to them, and they knew they had less than 1 year to live. There seems to be something kind of strange about that we have to wait until we're almost gone before we express deep gratitude. So this is one of my few original ideas. I said to Lola, who's thrown some of the greatest parties, I said, I have a milestone birthday coming up. And instead of another great party, I want to have another kind of gift. Here's the gift. I want permission to travel around the United States and abroad, to be able to sit down with everybody who'd made a difference in my life. And I wanted to tell them what they had meant to me while I was alive and well, and while they were alive and well. And so developed this extraordinary year-long journey of mine. So let me kind of briefly tell you how it came to pass. Now I'm going to tell you these stories. You're not going to do the same thing. I understand that. But there may be a piece of what I did that might make sense to you. So it was fairly simple. I started with a legal pad. And I thought about the person I knew the longest time, and I wrote the person's name down. And then I asked the defining question, what difference did this person really make in my life? And then I would put specific, explicit contributions that that person made in my life. It was very clear after I completed that exercise who have to be on my journey. And I did that for every single person that was on my journey. This is something that was unbelievable to me. In the process of just doing that, not even speaking to one person, brought me in touch with those relationships and elevated my appreciation of those relationships before I ever went out and said one word. To me, it's like seeing it in high definition. And I felt so grateful after each one of those experiences of making the names in the list. Let me tell you briefly about who was on the journey. There were some people from very simple lifestyles, and there were a couple billionaires on the trip as well. They were business colleagues. They were financial advisors, health advisors, some of my forum members, many of my forum members. Even some mentees of mine were on the list. And of course, family members that were important, and lifelong friends that have made a difference. 80% were men. They were as young as 28 and as old as 87. So age had no factor in who had made a significant difference in my life. There were 44 people. Those of you who read the book, you know there were 44 people ultimately that were on the journey. Usually I get this, oh man, I don't have 44 people. Maybe this guy can talk faster. Yeah. That's not the point. The point is that I hope tonight we're going to be able to demonstrate that everybody has one or more. And my experience is that there's usually one within 5 miles of where you live. Sometimes they're even in the house. No nudging. So once they were selected on my list, I then decided to give them a call. Obviously, I wasn't just going to show up, so I called them on the phone. I said, hey, listen, I want you to know I have this idea. I'm visiting people who made a real difference in my life, and I just want to know I'm coming to see you to tell you what you meant to me. What do you think they said? What do you think? First words out, almost everybody. Are you okay? Are you dying? That's more like it. And so their idea that this just doesn't happen unless you must, death must be imminent. That's all the books we've ever read. That's all that's ever happened. So I had to reassure them, no, I'm fine. I'm really fine. And they said, no, Walter, are you really okay? I said, I'm fine. I'm fine. So once I was able to reassure them, actually they were really pleased to know that they were included. And some were even honored to know that I would include them on the journey. I developed a structure for the conversations. Most of you have read the book, so in the interest of time, the structure is outlined in the book, and it tells you exactly how I went about each conversation. It was so helpful to me that I never changed the structure. It stayed the same for all 44 people. There were 3 other things that I just wanted to mention. One was that we didn't do these in public places, that most of these conversations were very private. They were very important for me. And so I always asked for them to arrange for a place that was really private. I brought that legal pad with me, the one that had all their contributions to me, because I didn't want to forget mentioning one thing that that person had meant in my life. So every single visit, I brought that pad with that list. And Finally, a friend of mine suggested I audio tape the conversations. That was a brilliant idea, so every one of them were audio taped. The second part of the book brings you in on the conversations. If you read it, you'll see some of the people I talked to and what I said. It's in the book. No need to take your precious time to talk about it. Let me just talk to you about the three things that I think really were take-home value for me going through this experience. Most of the people I spoke to, they knew how I felt about them. They really did. It wasn't like I had no idea, but they had no idea of why I felt the way I did. That was worth the price of admission. Not only was it satisfying myself to be able to express it to the people, but they were always feeling really good. And many of them didn't even really recognize how much of a contribution they had made, and that made it even more special for me. And finally, when I was done with this journey, I realized, God forbid if something happens to them, I know that I have the peace of mind that everything I wanted to say about what that person meant to me has been said. And I had a reason, tragically or sadly, that I lost one of the 44 people in the last year. And I want to just confirm I had peace of mind. So I took this journey for me. Once again, the book talks about it was not intended to be a book. It was a very private journey. And once again, thanks to my wife introducing me by accident to someone who was a producer at Hay House, they asked me to write the book, and that's why the book was written. I had no intentions going out that I would write a book. But I will say this, the last third of the book is all about you. That's when I try and inspire you to think about this journey for you. And I realize that there are a lot of good reasons for not doing it, because it was rarely done. Trust me, I know very few people who have done this. So there are reasons for it. So in one of the last chapters of the book, I write about hesitancy is but one step from action. And there I do everything I can to slay these obstacles to actually having you do it. For example, one of the first ones, I hear this expression, well, I'm too young for this. Some people say, I'm too young, I've got plenty of time. Well, I want to tell you, I lectured to graduate business students. And I think they average, I don't know, maybe 30 years old. And I suggested to them that they think about it. Matter of fact, I tried to get them started on the exercise during a couple-hour lecture. And then said, it's up to you, as I will say to you. It's up to you whether you want to act on it. So one of the students sends me an email the next day. I gave my email address because all the profits in the book go to charity, but my psychic satisfaction is when people write me emails and they say, wow, I did it. It was amazing. So this young lady goes home. It's 9 o'clock at night. She's an evening student. She had stayed after class to write down her complete list of what her father meant to her. She's living with her dad, and she goes home at 9 o'clock at night and says, Dad, I'd like you to sit down. I have something I'd like to tell you. Now, we ought to get this young lady in YPO. This is pretty impressive. She says, Dad, I'd like to sit and talk to you about what you mean to me. He said, please, I know what I mean to you. No, Dad. No, I want you to sit down. I have some things I want to say to you. She takes out her list and goes one by one over everything her father had done for her in her life that changed her life. She wrote me in the email saying, I've never had a more important conversation with my father, and he likely never had a more important conversation with me. So we're not too young. Others say, it doesn't really matter. Trust me, from my experience and the experience of many others, it does matter. Oh, there's another one. They know how I feel. Yeah, they do. But they have no idea really how they have impacted your life. This one you can probably relate to. I'm too busy. Got that, right? We're too busy. We got a lot of stuff going on. We're just too busy. Well, let me tell you, this was actually a graduate YPO, or this was standing, I'll never forget it. I was standing on the dock in Copenhagen. We were at a CEO conference, and a friend of mine that I had known over the years in CEO just started the conversation. He said, "Walter, what's going on in your life? What's up?" So I was right in the midst of this year-long journey, so I proceeded to tell him the story. Literally within 5 minutes of telling the story, tears started coming down his face. Now, this is one of the top leading owners of conglomerates in Europe and Africa. He is a very successful guy. And I said, "Gee, it looked like I hit a nerve there." He said, "It's hard for me even to talk about it." I've heard these stories. He said, "Walter, wow." He said, "You know, when I was 29, I couldn't get into business. I was trying to lease a manufacturing plant. And there was this guy that said, 'I want to back you. I'll co-sign that lease.' And he put me into the manufacturing business." That was at age 29. I've now built this enormous company, and I finally decided that I was going to go back and thank that man for all that he had done. I was in the midst at that time of my most recent acquisition, and it takes about 2 weeks to integrate so everybody knows who everybody is. But I said, as soon as I'm done, I'm going to go back and tell that man how grateful I am for the company I was able to build, for how good he was. When I finished my 2 weeks, I called his family, and he had died 1 week before. He said, "I've never forgiven myself for missing that opportunity." So we're not that busy. We can't be that busy. So the other one is I'm self-made. Well, I know a number of YPOers suffer a little bit from this inclination, but I can assure you I haven't yet, in all my opportunities to interact with people, found anybody who's self-made. So I'm sorry to destroy that principle, but most of you have had some help along the way. If you're not aware of it tonight, maybe this will raise your level of awareness. You are not self-made. This one is a common one. I'm uncomfortable expressing it. You know, that's kind of common. You know, it's kind of unusual to talk about this. You know, it's uncomfortable. So I have a friend in Palm Springs. His name is Charlie. Charlie was, for his whole lifetime, the closest and most powerful person to him was the number 3 guy in Washington. I won't leave his name because it's a very personal story. I told Charlie, I told the story, I said, "Walter, I've got to go back to Chicago and see this man. I've known him for my whole lifetime. Such an influence on my life." And I said, "Well, Charlie, that'd be great." Charlie goes back to Chicago because he knows this man is near death. He goes back, calls me 2 weeks later, and he said, "Walter, I went to Chicago. I want to tell you about it." I said, "Charlie, tell me about it." He said, "I spent 5 days with him." I said, "Wow. What did you talk about, Charlie?" He said, "We talked about old times." I said, "Wow. What'd you say when you left?" "Well, you know, my friend is 6'4" and about 220. He had an oxygen mask to assist with his breathing. And so when I went, I just gave him a hug and I told him I loved him. And he embraced me and he said, I know." I said, "Charlie, that was it, huh? That was the whole visit." I said, "Charlie, did you have things you wanted to tell him that you didn't tell him?" He said, "Walter, we're Marines. Marines don't talk like that. We don't talk like that." I said, "But you had some things you wanted to say, but they never got said. You don't have to do it by just personal contact. Did you ever think maybe you're writing a letter?" 2 weeks later, he calls me up. He said, "I want to have one more lunch." He said, "Walter, I wrote that letter." I said, "Amazing. How long was it?" He said, 2 pages. "How long did it take?" "It took me less than a half an hour." "What happened when he received it?" "He called me back. He could not speak. He was so touched by the letter." So I said, "Charlie, 2 pages, 1 envelope, less than a half an hour, and a 44-cent stamp." This was a few months ago for sure. He said, you got closure. He said, I did. The gentleman died 2 months later. Charlie never forgot that letter that he wrote. I think the last point is that people always say, I don't know that many people. We alluded to that earlier. Well, I know Brett is going to give you the opportunity at dinner to at least identify one person and to begin that process. So let me assure you that in the beginning, when I was going to take this journey, it was just a concept. It was just a concept. It's no longer a concept. This has been applied thousands of times. I have not heard that this has not been a powerful experience for people who do it. And in some cases, trust me, it has been life-changing. So for me, I hope this story inspires you to take an action. And that it provides you a springboard to think about the deep gratitude that you have to somebody or several people. And if it does, and you get the peace of mind that comes from it and the joy from being able to express it and the pleasure that the person will have from receiving it, then my cross-country trip was worthwhile. Thank you very much. Thank you. So we said we would have time for Q&A. There's a mic there, so anybody who has a question?
Well, I thought your presentation was so concise and insightful. I actually don't have any questions about it. I have questions about what you've learned between 40-something and now. So what are some of those?
Yes, so I promised to answer that question because it was a question that I did ask myself in advance. But for continuity, let me stay with the message, and then I will address that for sure. Thank you for asking that. Any questions? Yes.
I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you so much. It resonates quite a bit with me. I live a life very much in gratitude. It's been a philosophy of mine for most of my adult life. With that said, something that I struggle with is because my friends and people that I meet over time come to know me as a very grateful person, when I express gratitude to them, it can, because it's not a unique experience in the way that for many people it is, I don't have any fear about it. I do it regularly. It's a practice every day. Sometimes people respond with a bit of, oh, this is just you, Anna. It's not that you're truly grateful, it's just your personality. But truly, I feel so much gratitude on a daily basis. And so I would ask you if the practice or the mindset that you're suggesting is something that you're encouraging for the sake of inner peace, or for the sake of the recipient's peace and feeling of receiving the gratitude, and if that's even an issue, if it's for ourselves or for the recipient.
Yeah, what a beautiful question. First of all, don't you change one bit. That's the first thing. You might want to change a couple of friends, but don't change your approach. I'm just kidding, I think. The expression of gratitude was for me. It was for me. And I recognize, as a matter of fact, well, this is a little personal story, and somebody in the room may get a little uncomfortable, but I'm going to tell it anyway. One of the 44 that I invited wasn't sure he wanted to experience it. Another one of the 44 had to remind him, this is not about you, this is about Walter. So we need the opportunity to express gratitude to people who have been important to us, whether they have the capacity to grasp it, appreciate it, or sort it out. That's their job, not our job. Any other questions? Yes?
Were there any of the 44 who actually had they played an influential role in your life, but you actually didn't have positive experiences with them or feelings for them, but they actually had an impactful
Yeah.
impact on your life?
Yeah. So I'm smiling because this has a really geographical connection here. Every one of the people that I chose were people that I had a very positive relationship with. But because that question came up, that what about, so I described the people I saw were kind of, for me, like low-hanging fruit. You know, they were kind of really easy. But I thought about that question because others had asked about, what about people where you had an issue with them? Did you reach out to those people where you had a misunderstanding? And it was interesting that I had a corporate lawyer for 15 years right here on Fifth Avenue. And because I was asked that question, I wanted to have that experience. And I thought about this attorney. And he had been a great attorney, but he did something that crossed the line for me and ended our relationship. But because that question was asked, I decided I'm going to go back, because for 15 years he was really good. He just did something that I didn't appreciate. So I said, I'm going to give him a call. It was right up here. Called his office. He apparently moved his office and went back to the internet, and he had died 5 years ago. In that moment, I felt a little, which made me think that we shouldn't exclude those people who have given us a lot, and we may have had a misunderstanding with them. And I'll just want to share one more quick story related to that. As a person we had dinner with in Palm Springs, after dinner he wrote 17 letters to people who had been important to him, and then this was not a close friend, then asked to see me again because he wanted to tell me how important it was to write the letters. But the case in point is, one of the people he wrote the letter to was a sister that he hadn't spoken to in 10 years, because he realized that that sister was very important to him growing up. Not only did it feel good on his part, but it rekindled the relationship. So don't exclude people who may have disappointed you at some stage of their life if they've done a lot for you during your life. Yes?
Had you thought about taking this journey in the past? Did you give yourself your own excuses for being too busy to thank people as well?
No, actually, this was an epiphany. It just all came together. No, I had never not thought of it. It was this confluence of these ideas that I described and these life events. I had never delayed it. And it was very elaborate. You know, visiting 44 people is a big deal. One of them was in Kenya. One of them was in Mexico. They were all over the United States. It was a big commitment. Wouldn't trade it for the world. Yes?
So you sold your company at 58. You had time to go out and do this. You're saying, oh, you know, don't say you don't have the time. And maybe you think of one or two people and do this. But would you have done this had you not sold your company?
That's a really good question. I can't tell you that, but I think that I respond a little bit like that's an on-off switch. I clearly couldn't have taken this kind of journey when I was in business. That would have been impossible. But the message today is, don't worry about this long journey. Just look around and see some people that are people you don't want to miss. And find one or two or three or four. Don't worry about getting everybody, but get started. Don't wait till you're 58. If I knew what I knew now, I wouldn't have waited. I missed two. I'm sorry I missed those two. If I started at your age, I wouldn't have missed them.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, besides professional colleagues, family members, and YPOers, can you give us a couple people on that list, if there were any outside of that bracket, and their reaction?
Yeah, well, sure. There were several. One in particular was the oldest one, a man who affected my thinking more than anybody in my lifetime, more than any teacher, more than any consultant. And he was a brilliant man. And I had practiced his thinking backwards for almost 40 years. And he lived in New Hampshire. And so I went up to see him. It was a unique circumstance because he was blind since he was 21, but his impact on me was profound. So he really wasn't a business person. I would guess that would fall under personal development. I can also say this, that my conversation with my wife and my 2 sons were as profound as any conversations I've ever had with those 3 people in my life. So don't underestimate the power if it's a consultant or it's a family member. It can be a remarkable experience. Any other questions? Yes?
Was anyone offended that they didn't make the cut?
Never had that question. I was hoping I would never get that question, actually. The answer is very possibly. I tried to probe to find out in one of the relationships if that was a factor, but I couldn't really absolutely determine it, so I had to presume it probably was. But I was very authentic in this. If people hadn't made a real difference in my life because they were close family members or even people I had known for a long time, doesn't make the cut. And I was true to my word, and at the end of the day, I lived with it. That's a tough question. Yes. Incidentally, who's the time man here? I know I never speak before dinner, but it's getting late. Let me handle another question.
So, through the lens of gratitude, you've thanked so many people, but have you been also more grateful for your time and the limited quantity of it? And if so, then have you spent it differently since you had that epiphany?
Yeah, I've been pretty careful with my time for most of my life because I got a really early message that I described. So I'm probably not the guy that most people call just to hang out with, because I have fairly intentional actions throughout most of my life, but they get increasingly so. As you get older, you get more so. So if you're intentional when you're young, you get more intentional. I'll tell you, this is the first time I've flown cross country to make this speech because I wasn't going to give 3 days of my life to make one speech. That's how careful I am. And this had to satisfy a lot of other connections before I made this trip. Any other questions? If not, I'll go back to, yes, okay.
What if you make your list of all those people who have been very important to you, and a number of people on that list are no longer with us? You said you did this activity really for yourself, not for the people you're being grateful for. So how do we reconcile with that, with people that we know were so instrumental in our lives that we no longer can go sit down?
So these are people that are no longer here, and yet you're very grateful to them. I think you have to honor them in your own personal way, and I think it's an extraordinary wake-up call for not missing anybody else. Okay, so the lessons learned. This was actually a very interesting personal learning experience, and if anything else, I'm a lifelong learner. And so there were probably 6 things. I'll try and go through them fairly quickly, but the difference between feeling them at age in my 40s and feeling them more deeply now, well, you probably figured out I'm 78 years old. So here's what I learned. I learned, number one, that I learned a lot more from my disappointments, a lot more from stress than I ever did from success. And the only way that I ever learned a lot more was that I expected to learn something from those moments. And so I encourage you, not necessarily when you're in that moment, but before you leave that experience, don't bury that experience. Capture the learning. And I'm reminded as I walked over here today the expression, the stronger the wind, the stronger the trees. So never be afraid of the wind, but I would be petrified if I never learned anything from the experience. So that's number one. Number two, I've been practicing more and more, and that's leading with curiosity instead of judgments. You know, it's amazing. I was an average student in school, and it kind of annoyed me that all you had to do was think of the right answer. Now for the last 30 years of my life, I've been trying to get the right question. So I leave with you in interacting with others, in trying to be helpful for others. Don't worry about the answers. Think about the powerful and right questions. Number 3, health matters a lot. I remember your age, I was so excited I got my first really special car, a Jaguar. I never had a car like that. It was just, I waxed that thing once a month. Not me, I had someone do it. I don't want you YPOers to lose, a little respect for me. I had my staff of 20 out there waxing my car. No. So, get back to that. And then it was funny, I was taking care of that car so well, and I came to the conclusion that I'm actually taking better care of that car than I was taking care of my body. And I said, this is ridiculous. I know as much as I love that car, I'm going to trade that car in. This thing I got for the rest of my life. So health matters a lot. Take care of it. There is no trade-in, and as you get older, you will see that even becomes even more important. Next point is the realization, I kind of always had this feeling, but now I'm a deep believer. Everything we do has our signature on it. Everything. Every act, everything we say, our personal integrity, that's our signature. And so for me, at the end of the day, being able to look back over a life of integrity is a really blessed life. But realize that everything you do, everything counts. And that signature is unique to you as to how you choose to live your life. The 5th one, I guess, would not be a surprise, but meaningful relationships to me are an absolute essential. Now, I love my business. I thought I worked really hard, and I thought it was like the most important thing in terms of a business enterprise. And the reality is, I sold that business 20 years ago. If my life was my business, my life would be over. So I believe the personal relationships transcend that. And I'm not talking about just personal relationships in your business. I'm talking about personal relationships in your life. And I can tell you this, you can't harvest relationships at my age if you don't grow them earlier in your life. And you can't grow them if you don't plant them. So I have so much gratitude for the planting that I did in my 40s that I'm now getting to harvest in my 70s. Finally, it's the power of being mindful. Mindfulness is about all being in the moment. All right, I'll make a basic question. When was the last time you thought about the water and hot water for a shower? Probably the last time you didn't have any hot water for showers, the last time you thought. That's the way I used to be. Now I'm very conscious of how fortunate it is to turn a lever, get water, adjust it just a little bit, and it's just the right temperature. Start your day off with a little bit of that gratitude and be conscious of how many things we have in our life. YPO, the organization, the relationships, the family. There's so many things to be grateful for, and they have established that gratitude is really a way to stay healthy. So I think wisdom for me is appreciating things before you lose them. So in summary, I'd say capture the learning moments in stressful situations, ask great questions, keep healthy. Remember, everything we do has a signature on it. Plant and grow meaningful relationships, and be mindful and grateful. So that is what was not so obvious to me when I was sitting out there your age. So I'd like to close with a poem that's a little consistent with the earlier subject that I talked about. This was written over 100 years ago. So you think this is a new issue? It isn't. It's called Around the Corner. Around the corner, I have a friend in this great city that has no end. Sounds like New York. Yet the days go by and weeks rush on, and before I know it, a year is gone. And I never see my old friend's face. For life is a swift and terrible race. He knows I like him just as well as in the days when I rang his bell. And he rang mine, but we were younger then, and now we're busy, tired men, tired of playing a foolish game, tired of trying to make a name. Tomorrow I say, I will call on Jim, just to show him I'm thinking of him. But tomorrow comes and tomorrow goes, and distance between us grows and grows. Around the corner, yet miles away, here's a telegram, sir. Jim died today. And that's what we get and deserve in the end, around the corner, a vanished friend. It is my hope that tonight I have inspired you to take an action so you will never, ever have a vanished friend in your future. And that in the process you will enrich your life, you'll enhance your relationship, and you'll have peace of mind that you said everything you wanted to people who had been important to you. It has been my pleasure to be with you this evening. Thank you.